In the quiet hours of the night, when shadows stretch long and the air grows thick with an unshakable chill, they say the unreal walks among us, a spirit born of betrayal and anguish. Its purpose is singular, vengeance. It is not a ghost that lingers out of confusion or longing, but one that burns with an unrelenting hatred, tethered to this world by the weight of its torment. You'll know it by the long, tangled black hair obscuring its pale, deathly face and the flowing white burial robes that seem to glide above the ground. Some say its hollow eyes pierce straight into your soul, exposing your sins, your guilt, your fears. It does not discriminate in its wrath. Those who have wronged it will pay dearly, but others, unlucky enough to cross its path, often fall victim to its unrelenting curse. Whispers of its presence have endured for centuries, passed down in hushed tones through generations. The Onryo cannot be reasoned with, and its thirst for justice or destruction cannot be easily quenched. If you feel the chill of its approach, beware. What injustice could summon such hatred? And more importantly, who might it be coming for tonight? The Ryokan Yoshinaga stood at the edge of a cedar forest, its sloped roof heavy with snow in winter, and its wooden walls darkened by centuries of rain and wind. Travelers spoke of its warm hearths and impeccable hospitality, a hidden gem untouched by time. But they didn't linger long. For as charming as Yoshinaga was, something about it made guests uneasy. They couldn't quite explain why. It was just a sense, the way the corridors seemed to stretch too far in the dim light, or how the tatami mats creaked as though someone unseen followed their every step. For Hana, the Ryokan was an opportunity. At 21, she'd left her small village for the first time, hoping to escape her family's expectations and find independence. Yoshinaga offered her that, a job as a maid, room and board included. It didn't matter that the inn's owner, a gaunt woman in her 60s named Okami-san, seemed perpetually dour, or that the other employees kept to themselves, speaking only when necessary. Hana had been at the inn for a week when the whispers began. It was her third evening shift, and she was folding futons in one of the unoccupied guest rooms. The air was heavy with the scent of sandalwood and the faint chill of winter seeping through the thin walls. The room was silent save for the rustle of fabric. Then came the sound, a soft, insistent whisper, barely audible over the blood rushing in her ears. She froze, hands clutching the edge of the futon. "Hello?" Her voice cracked, the words swallowed by the silence that followed. She told herself it was nothing, a draft, the wind moving through the forest outside. But as she bent to finish her work, the whisper returned, this time clearer. It wasn't words exactly, more like the rhythm of someone murmuring just beyond understanding. The sound seemed to come from below her, the floorboards vibrating faintly beneath her knees. Hana mentioned the sound to Okami-san the next morning during breakfast. The older woman glanced at her with tired eyes but said nothing. When Hana pressed, Okami-san shook her head. "You'll hear all sorts of things in a place like this. The wood is old, it groans and shifts. Don't let it trouble you." Hana nodded, but the explanation felt hollow. It wasn't just groaning wood. It was something alive, something deliberate. As the days passed, the whispers became more frequent. Sometimes they were faint, like wind brushing against the walls. Other times, they were sharp and urgent, echoing down the empty corridors. She tried to ignore them, to drown them out with the hum of chores and the chatter of guests, but they clung to her like shadows. One afternoon, Hana was cleaning the reception area when Okami-san called her into the back office. Inside, a man and woman stood, their faces stiff with unease. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his expression tight as though he'd rather be anywhere else. The woman was slender, her beauty diminished by the dark hollows under her eyes. "These are our new guests," Okami-san said. "Please escort them to room." Hana bowed and led them through the Ryokan. The couple didn't speak as they walked, their silence heavy as the man carried their suitcase and the woman clutched her handbag with pale fingers. When they reached room, Hana slid open the door and gestured for them to enter. "If you need anything," the woman turned sharply, her voice a whisper, "we'll manage." Hana blinked, startled by the coldness in her tone. The woman closed the door without another word. That night, the whispers grew louder. Hana lay on her futon in the small staff quarters, the thin walls doing little to muffle the sounds from the rest of the inn. But it wasn't the usual noises of footsteps or distant laughter. It was the murmuring, low, insistent, and far too close. She sat up, heart pounding. The room was dark. the faint glow of moonlight seeping through the paper screens. For a moment she thought she heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving down the hallway. She slid open her door and peeked out. The corridor was empty, its shadow stretching long under the flickering lamplight. The whispers continued, coming from beneath her feet. The next morning, Hana was sent to clean room. Okami-san had instructed her to tidy up while the guests were out, but when she arrived, she found the door slightly ajar. She knocked hesitantly. "Hello, it's Hana. May I come in?" There was no answer. She stepped inside. The room was cold, the air thick with a metallic tang that made her stomach turn. The futon lay unrolled in the center of the room, its blankets tangled. Something dark stained the tatami near the edge, a smear that led to the low table. Hana crouched, her fingers trembling as she touched the stain. It was sticky, drying blood. By the time she found Okami-san, the stain was gone. "I swear it was there," Hana insisted, her voice shaking. Okami-san's expression darkened. "You're overtired. This job is not for the faint of heart." Hana wanted to argue, but the look in Okami-san's eyes stopped her. There was something there, fear, maybe, or a knowledge Hana didn't understand. That night, the Ryokan was silent. The guests had retreated to their rooms, and the staff had finished their duties. Hana lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her head. The whispers were louder now, filling her ears like a tide. She thought of the couple in room, of the woman's haunted eyes and the man's clenched jaw. Something was wrong. She could feel it, a tension in the air that made her skin crawl. The whispers shifted, becoming voices distinct, male and female, rising in an argument that was muffled but furious. Hana climbed out of bed, her feet cold against the floor. She followed the sound down the corridor, her hands brushing the walls for balance. The voices led her to room. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was heavy, the metallic tang of blood sharper now. The futon was empty, the blankets discarded in a heap. The room felt wrong, as though the walls had shifted closer, pressing inward. Hana's breath caught as she noticed the floor. The tatami mats bulged unnaturally, as though something moved beneath. The next morning, Hana was sent to clean room 12. Okami-san had instructed her to tidy up while the guests were out, but when she arrived, she found the door slightly ajar. She knocked hesitantly. "Hello, it's Hana. May I come in?" There was no answer. She stepped inside. The room was cold, the air thick with a metallic tang that made her stomach turn. The futon lay unrolled in the center of the room, its blankets tangled. Something dark stained the tatami near the edge, a smear that led to the low table. Hana crouched, her fingers trembling as she touched the stain. It was sticky, drying blood. By the time she found Okami-san, the stain was gone. "I swear it was there," Hana insisted, her voice shaking. Okami-san's expression darkened. "You're overtired. This job is not for the faint of heart." Hana wanted to argue, but the look in Okami-san's eyes stopped her. There was something there, fear, maybe, or a knowledge Hana didn't understand. That night, the Ryokan was silent. The guests had retreated to their rooms and the staff had finished their duties. Hana lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her head. The whispers were louder now, filling her ears like a tide. She thought of the couple in room 12, of the woman's haunted eyes and the man's clenched jaw. Something was wrong. She could feel it, a tension in the air that made her skin crawl. The whispers shifted, becoming voices, distinct, male and female, rising in an argument that was muffled but furious. Hana climbed out of bed, her feet cold against the floor. She followed the sound down the corridor, her hands brushing the walls for balance. The voices led her to room 12. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was heavy, the metallic tang of blood sharper now. The futon was empty, the blankets discarded in a heap. The room felt wrong, as though the walls had shifted closer, pressing inward. Hana's breath caught as she noticed the floor. The tatami mats bulged unnaturally, as though something moved beneath them. A hand. She stumbled back, her heart hammering as a pale hand pushed through the mat, followed by another. A face emerged, a woman's, with sunken eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. The Unryo pulled itself free, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its black hair trailed behind it like spilled ink, and its hollow gaze locked onto Hana. Hana wanted to run, to scream, but she was frozen, her body paralyzed by the Onryo's gaze. The spirit moved closer, its whispering filling her mind with a chorus of anguish. It wasn't just the couple's voices. It was the voices of dozens, hundreds, all trapped within the Ryokan's walls. The next morning, room 12 was empty. The couple was gone. Their belongings vanished as though they'd never existed. Hana told Okami-san what she'd seen, but the older woman merely shook her head. "You've seen it now," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. "The Ryokan keeps its secrets, and now you're a part of them." Hana realized then that she could never leave. The Ryokan had claimed her, just as it had claimed the couple and all the others before them. The whispers followed her, growing louder each night until they were all she could hear. And when the guests arrived, she saw the way the Ryokan watched them, hungry for their pain, waiting for its next victim. Hana understood now. The Onryo wasn't a single spirit, it was many, an endless cycle of torment that fed the Ryokan's walls and floors. And someday, she too would become one of them, her whispers echoing in the tatami for the next girl to hear. The Ryokan stood silent in the snow, its walls dark and ancient, holding its secrets close. And deep within, the whispers continued, weaving their endless song of despair. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire. The stillness of night, when shadows grow long and an icy chill settles in the air, they say the Onryo walks among us. A spirit forged from betrayal and anguish. Its purpose is singular, vengeance. Unlike ghosts that linger out of longing or confusion, the Onryo is driven by an unquenchable hatred, bound to this world by the weight of its torment. You'll recognize it by its long, tangled black hair veiling a pale, lifeless face, and the flowing white burial robes that seem to float above the ground. Some claim its hollow eyes can pierce into your very soul, exposing your guilt, fears, and sins. Its wrath knows no bounds. Those who wronged it are doomed to suffer, but even the unfortunate souls who cross its path may fall victim to its merciless curse. For centuries, whispers of its presence have lingered, passed down in fearful murmurs from one generation to the next. The Onryo cannot be bargained with, nor can its hunger for justice or destruction be easily satisfied. If you sense the chilling touch of its approach, take heed. What kind of injustice could give rise to such relentless fury? And, more ominously, who might it be seeking tonight? The Yoshinaga Ryokan was a place where time had long since grown moss. Its darkened wooden beams and paper-thin walls held whispers of centuries, and the smell of old cedar mingled with the faint trace of incense. Perched on the edge of a forest thick with towering pines and whispering winds, it was a sanctuary for travelers, and a prison for the secrets it refused to release. Hana, the Ryokan's caretaker, moved like a shadow through the dimly lit halls, her face composed but her eyes betraying the weight of her burden. Hana had began working at the Ryokan after leaving her family and starting a new life, but her new duty, Hana had come to learn, often came with chains. She knew the stories of the Onryo, vengeful spirits that clung to the Ryokan like a second skin. Her mother had warned her of their presence, their silent rage, their unrelenting sorrow. Hana's role was not just to manage the Ryokan, but to coexist with its restless inhabitants, ensuring their wrath never spilled beyond its walls. One cold evening, as the wind hissed through the trees and rattled the shutters, an old man arrived at the Ryokan. He introduced himself as Shigeru, a retired teacher seeking solace in the countryside. His face was lined with years of knowledge and regret, and his eyes held a weary curiosity as he stepped into the Ryokan's shadowed interior. "Welcome to Yoshinaga," Hana said, bowing deeply. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, as though she were reluctant to draw attention to herself. "Your room is ready, room 12, at the end of the hall." Shigeru nodded, his footsteps muffled by the tatami mats as he followed her. The hallway stretched endlessly in the dim light, the flickering lanterns casting long, trembling shadows. The air grew colder as they approached his room, and Shigeru felt a subtle pressure in his chest, as though the Ryokan itself was testing his resolve. "If you need anything, please let me know," Hana said, sliding the door open. The room was sparse but clean, with a low table, a futon, and a single vase holding a withered branch. The window overlooked the forest, now cloaked in darkness. "Thank you," Shigeru replied, his voice echoing faintly. He placed his bag on the floor and settled into the room as Hana slid the door shut. He couldn't shake the feeling that her departure left the room emptier than it had been. That night, the Ryokan came alive with sound. It began as a low creak, the groan of ancient wood adjusting to the cold. Then came the distant patter of footsteps, so light they might have been imagined. Shigeru lay on the futon, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as a shriek pierced the silence. It was faint but unmistakable, a sound of raw anguish that sent a chill racing down his spine. He sat up, his breath fogging in the cold air. The room seemed darker than before, the corners impossibly deep. He told himself it was the wind, the age of the building, but the rationalizations felt hollow. Another sound broke the stillness, a whisper, close yet incomprehensible. Shigeru turned his head sharply toward the corner of the room. A figure stood there. It was a woman, her long black hair hanging limp and lifeless around her face. Her kimono was pale and tattered, the fabric stained with dark, wet streaks. Her face was partially obscured by her hair, but her eyes, those wide, gleaming eyes, burned with a malevolence that froze Shigeru in place. She didn't move, yet the air between them seemed to hum with tension. "Who?" Shigeru began, but his voice failed him. The woman tilted her head, the motion sharp and unnatural, like a marionette yanked by invisible strings. She took a step forward, her bare feet silent against the tatami. Suddenly, the room's temperature plummeted. Shigeru's breath came in rapid bursts, visible in the freezing air. The woman's lips parted, and a guttural choking sound escaped her throat. It wasn't a voice but a wail, an unholy lament that echoed through the room. Shigeru scrambled back, his heart pounding until his hand struck the wall behind him. The woman stopped, her eyes locked onto his. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The room was empty, but the oppressive weight of her presence lingered. Shigeru didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, watching the shadows of the forest shift and dance. When morning came, he confronted Hana in the Ryokan's main room. "This place is haunted," he said, his voice shaking. Hana's expression didn't change. "I know," she said simply. "Why didn't you warn me? Would you have stayed if I had?" Shigeru had no answer to that. He stared at Hana, searching her face for some sign of remorse or fear. But she remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You should leave," she said after a moment. "The longer you stay, the harder it will be." Shigeru wanted to leave, but a morbid curiosity held him back. That night he returned to room 12, his nerves raw and frayed. He lit a small lamp and kept it by his side, the faint glow a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. The sounds began again, creaks, whispers, faint cries that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Shigeru tried to ignore them, but his resolve crumbled when he glanced toward the corner. The woman was there again, but she was not alone. Beside her stood another figure, a man. He was taller, his posture rigid and his face frozen in an expression of wide-eyed horror. His mouth hung open, as though caught in a silent scream, and his gaze was fixed on the far wall, unblinking and unseeing. The woman moved first, her head jerking toward Shigeru with a snap that made his stomach lurch. Her husband remained still, his lifeless eyes drilling into the void. The air grew heavier with each passing second, and Shigeru felt as though he were drowning in their presence. The woman advanced, her movements unnaturally fluid yet disjointed. She reached out a hand, her fingers claw-like and trembling. Shigeru couldn't move, his body paralyzed by an invisible force. Her touch was icy and searing all at once, and as her fingers grazed his arm, visions flooded his mind. He saw the Ryokan as it once was, bustling with life and laughter. He saw the woman, alive and radiant, her husband by her side. He saw the betrayal, the blood, the despair that had turned their love into a curse. The images were fleeting but vivid, searing themselves into his memory. When Shigeru came to, he was alone. The lamp had gone out, and the room was silent save for the sound of his ragged breathing. He stumbled to the door and fled into the hallway. his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the stillness. Hana was waiting for him in the main room, her expression unreadable. "You saw them," she said. It wasn't a question. "Why?" Shigeru demanded. "Why do they haunt this place? Why do you stay?" Hana's gaze dropped to the floor. "I'm bound to this Ryokan, just as they are. The Onryo. They were guests of the inn. Their love turned to hatred, their lives to death. I have been allowed life so long as I remain. And the guests? What happens to them? Most leave before it's too late." Shigeru's blood ran cold. "And if they don't?" Hana didn't answer. She didn't need to. Shigeru left the Ryokan at dawn, his heart heavy with dread. As he walked away, the wind carried the faint sound of a shriek, a reminder of the spirits that would never rest. As long as he stepped foot in room 12 of Yoshinaga a single time, he was bound to the Onryo forever. In the hushed stillness of night, when shadows stretch long and the air turns frigid, they say the Onryo walks among us. Born from betrayal and torment, it exists for one purpose alone: vengeance. Unlike spirits trapped by longing or confusion, the Onryo is fueled by an undying rage, tethered to this world by the weight of its suffering. You will know it by the long, tangled black hair shrouding a pale, lifeless face, and the flowing white burial robes that seem to hover above the ground. Some claim its hollow eyes can pierce into your very soul, laying bare your fears, sins, and guilt. Its wrath is boundless. Those who wronged it are doomed, but even the innocent who cross its path may fall prey to its merciless curse. For generations, whispers of its presence have persisted, passed down in fearful murmurs. The Onryo cannot be reasoned with, nor can its thirst for retribution or destruction be easily sated. If you feel the icy grip of its presence drawing near, beware. What injustice could have birthed such unrelenting fury? And more chilling still, who does it seek tonight? The rain had been unrelenting that evening, a slow and steady downpour that draped the landscape in a misty shroud. The sky, bruised with heavy clouds, cast the land in a perpetual twilight, making it impossible to distinguish where the heavens ended and the earth began. Nestled within the mountains of Kyoto, a centuries-old Ryokan stood, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of time and sorrow. Hana moved soundlessly through the dimly lit corridors, the scent of tatami and aged cedar filling her nostrils. She had long become accustomed to the oppressive silence that swallowed this place, broken only by the occasional sigh of the wind or the whisper of shifting wood. The guests, when they did come, never stayed long. They always left before dawn if they could, or worse, when they didn't, they were taken. She was bound to this place. The Ryokan did not permit her to leave. It whispered to her, controlled her, and most of all, it fed on those who entered unworthy. The Ryokan was old, older than anyone truly knew. Records claimed it had been built in the Edo period, but even that could not be certain. Generations had come and gone, its owners tied to the land, trapped in its suffocating grip. Hana had inherited this duty as a child when her mother disappeared in the same manner as so many others. Her grandmother had told her the truth then. In hushed, trembling tones, there was no leaving the Ryokan. Not truly. The walls were hungry, the floors thirsty for souls, and they had been bound to serve it. The stories told of a woman who had perished there long ago, betrayed and left to die by the one she loved. The legend claimed she still wandered the halls, vengeful and restless, her sorrow etched into the walls themselves. Over the years, Hana had learned the truth behind the legend. The Onryo was real, and it was the Ryokan itself that fed her grief, bound her here, just as it bound Hana. Tonight, another visitor had arrived. A wealthy foreign businessman, dressed in an immaculate suit, stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat. His presence was incongruous, too polished, too modern for the weight of the Ryokan's history. "I have a reservation," he said in heavily accented Japanese, sliding a sleek black credit card across the counter. His name was Richard Lawson. He had a sharp, angular face with a thin mouth that curved only when it served him. His gold watch glinted under the lantern's warm glow. He smelled of expensive cologne, of indulgence and arrogance. Hana did not smile as she processed his check-in. "Your room is ready, Lawson-sama." He took the key with a nod and strode toward the hallway, not noticing how the lanterns flickered when he passed. He did not feel the air change, did not sense the growing weight pressing upon him. But Hana did. The Ryokan had stirred. Room 12 was at the farthest end of the Ryokan, overlooking the dark woods. It was a cursed room, one Hana never gave to guests unless it was necessary. But the Ryokan had whispered its choice. As she watched him walk away, the air in the lobby grew dense. A familiar chill slithered up her spine. The floorboards groaned, though no one had stepped on them. She did not turn around. "I know," she whispered into the empty air. "He will not see morning." The Ryokan hummed in approval. Richard had not come alone. Within the hour, a woman arrived, tall, slender, with dark eyes lined in smudged coal. She was not his wife. Hana did not need to ask. This woman's posture, her manner, the way she clung to him, it was the behavior of someone who existed in the periphery of his life, not within it. They retired to room 12 together. The sliding door shut, and silence followed. For a while, nothing happened. Then the whispering began. It started as a rustling, like silk brushing against the walls. Then came the distant sound of water dripping, though the pipes in the Ryokan had long been replaced. The murmurs, unintelligible at first, grew insistent, like many voices speaking in hushed tones just beyond the veil of comprehension. Inside room 12, Richard stirred, the sensation of breath against his neck startling him awake. The woman beside him was fast asleep, her body turned away. The room had grown unbearably cold. The lantern's glow had dimmed to sickly embers, casting restless shadows that stretched unnaturally long against the walls. The air smelled of damp earth, of decay. A soft sob echoed from the corner of the room. Richard sat up, his pulse hammering. "Hello?" The sobs grew louder, punctuated by a wet, shuddering breath. The woman beside him stirred, mumbling in her sleep, oblivious. Then, from the darkest corner, something moved. A woman, her form twisted, broken. Her black hair, stringy and damp, hung over her face. Her kimono, tattered and soaked, clung to her wasted frame. Her hands, long-fingered and claw-like, dragged against the tatami as she crawled closer. Her head snapped up. Richard saw her face, mouth torn too wide in a silent scream, eyes black as pits, empty and endless. He tried to move. His body did not obey. The air thickened, pressing against him, suffocating. His chest ached as unseen hands clawed at his ribs, his breath stolen in ragged gasps. The Onryo hovered above him now, her jaw unhinging further, a guttural wail spilling forth. The lanterns flickered violently. The woman beside him still slept, unmoving, unaware. Richard's screams never left his throat. Anna stood outside the door, staring at the paper-thin walls. The shadows moved behind them, writhing like ink spreading through water. Then, silence. The door creaked open on its own. The woman, Richard's lover, was still asleep, untouched, her breath slow and even. But Richard was gone. Not a trace remained. No clothes, no belongings. Only the faint indentation on the futon where his body had once been. The Ryokan had claimed another. Hana let out a quiet sigh, closing the door softly behind her. She did not question where Richard had gone. There was only one place he could be now. Beyond the walls, the wind howled, carrying the soft echoes of distant, endless sobbing. And the Ryokan, as it always had, stood waiting for the next visitor. In the morning, Hana went to room 12 again, her hands shaking as she slid open the door. The woman was still asleep, untouched, oblivious. But the room smelled of old blood, of damp earth, as if it had taken Richard and dragged him somewhere beyond the mortal realm. The walls sighed, and for a fleeting moment, Hana saw them ripple like breathing flesh. She stepped back quickly, exhaling. She had seen this before, and she would see it again. The Ryokan had fed, but it would hunger soon. It always did. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short, scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire.